Transitioning away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy is one of the most important ways in which we can limit the effects of climate change and build resilience. We toured the Renova Energy Corporation facilities in Palm Desert with founder and CEO Vince Battaglia to learn more about solar energy. Let's start at just a real basic level. How do layers of silica make electricity?
In principle, it's sand. It is sand that is heated up, hardened into these torpedo-like tubes, and then sliced 1/16 of a millimeter, boom, 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 like that. And then on the back, on this particular manufacturer's solar cell, on the back he put all the what we call raceways. That's where all the current goes, positive and negative. On this one, all the raceways are in the front. So this panel is made of these cells here. Exactly, that's that, like that. Underneath it is some mylar, and then on top of that are the cells they lay out, and then glazing, or just glass on top, and an aluminum frame, and ba-ba-da, it's not elves and magic. Now I want you to do me a favor and crack it. See how brittle, see how brittle these cells are. And you can do the same thing.
Break it, you pay for it.
No, you're all good. Isn't that, see how brittle? Now this particular manufacturer, you can break it, move it around all you want, but the raceways are still intact. So you'll still get current if a golf ball hits or something else. These happen to be our Asian friends who manufacture solar panels. So there is
you've broken that one, you have to pay for that one.
Yeah, that one we'll just charge you on the way out. You'll be fine. But that is why not all solar cells, or not all solar panels are the same. Those panels that are made with cells like that, yes, they'll collect, but if over time, first of all, if a golf ball hits them, you break the cell and now you're not getting current.
So tell me about the lifespan of the American-made solar panels.
The lifespan is up to 40 years, so they will quietly churn away and create energy for 40 years. They're warranted for 25, and there's a degradation as well too. The amount of energy over time degrades. So you take it out of the box, and in the first year you get 100% of that solar module's output. By year 20 for this American brand, you get 90% of the output. Some of the Chinese brands, the degradation is higher, so after 20 years, they'll actually be down to about 70% of the amount of energy they got when they came out of the box. So degradation is also a big differentiator when we talk about solar panels.
After 40 years, what happens? Am I looking at, for instance, having to replace my entire solar system, or am I looking at replacing certain panels?
Yep. After 40 years, if you're not happy with the output, because you're now down to maybe 60-70% of the original output, in 40 years with the way technology and efficiencies are coming to our solar modules, if you needed all of these modules or panels to power your home, you would probably, in 40 years, we're looking at a panel about this big to power the same needs.
So when I was reading online about your company, one of the things that I saw referred to more than once was the right size system.
Right.
So what kind of factors are you looking at to determine what the right size system is?
In order to size a solar system accurately, it's custom for each home, because a 2,500 square foot home here and here may have 5 people living here and 2 people living here. These folks use a lot less energy than the family of 5. So we simply look at 1 year back history of how many kilowatt hours, which is the measurement unit that we use. How many kilowatt hours did each home use? This home will need more kilowatt hours to operate with a larger family than the smaller family. So it is paramount that your engineering team accurately looks at the home's history, and then we reverse engineer. We figure out how many solar panels will need to be up on that rooftop in order to power that family's need for that full year.
So it's the number of people in the family and the square footage of the home?
Yeah, and in
what their energy usage is like.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it. Because if this family decided to put efficiencies in, like the solar tubes, if they got a better pool pump which required less electricity, you're going to see a much lower energy load in this home than you will for this one. There are a few factors, which is why the engineering is the most fun part for us. Each home is different. but I am a massive proponent of efficiencies. That's really what we need to address, is how do we make that envelope that we live in our homes and in our offices, how do we make it more efficient? And then we can put a smaller solar system on ultimately. But that just went over people's heads. They were like, nope, let's go solar. So that's what we do.
When you and I met, you were in an MBA program at UC Riverside. And so as you entered the program, did you know that this was what you were going to do, or how did your thoughts evolve to come up with this company?
This was in 2005 I entered. That's when I had met you, was in 2005. We had a cohort of like 21 students then.
First ever class at UCF.
First ever class, and we were all excited and enthusiastic from all walks of life. And then the end of 2005, in 2006 it was, they said, okay, you're going to need to defend a thesis when you graduate at the end of this next school year, which was 2007. And so when you go away for the summer, they said, think about what it is that you want to defend, create a business, and write about it. That's what your next year's capstone will be. And so I went away for the summer and looked at different businesses I was interested in, and energy just kept coming up as far as understanding that there was going to be, if not now, which was 2006, there was going to be a need in the future to absolutely replace our addiction to non-renewable fossil fuels. Their costs were coming up, and no one in our government was talking about how we were going to control that or replace it. And solar was the answer. It was a hobbyist's kind of thinking back in 2006. And I thought, if you were to just create a retail brand that people knew they could call, and that there would be a service person there, and that it would be sold not from the Chuck in the truck or the Dan in the van, but by a legitimate brand, then I bet we could get human beings to adapt to using solar photovoltaics. And that's what we did beginning in 2006. I wrote that, defended it in 2007. We built 3 solar systems that first year to prove our concept. And oh my gosh, I forgot it.
The rest is history.
The rest is history. And the intent is to go into the countries that really, 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 really need assistance with the way that they get their energy, and that they remain comfortable.
In Caribbean islands?
Caribbean islands for sure. I was just in the Maldives as well, in the Indian Ocean, and those folks, it's diesel. They cart in big tankers of diesel, and they burn that all day long. And the Caribbean, at Puerto Rico, it's all they're doing is burning liquid fuel in order to generate electricity. And they are not fortunate enough to have geothermal bubbling up, or they're not really using hydro as much as they should, because they need their water supplies. They don't want to dam things up. Okay, well, they got more sunshine than anything. And then as batteries get better, that's simply bringing microgrids to those islands. A lot of those folks can't, what a great way to be able to save them the cost of electric, so that they can redirect that money to foodstuffs, to education, to other things that matter to humans. So that's the intent. But I'm looking at this area, so we just needed to prove our concepts here, move into these areas by 2025, and then we'll get down into the America.
So I think that the idea you have of moving down into countries where energy is not that available and they have abundant sunlight or sunshine, that is an excellent model. But this gets to this question I think a lot of people might have, is that solar is something that the affluent can have and enjoy. But you're talking about a market where there isn't a lot of affluence. So how do you see that working?
My cost to generate a kilowatt hour, which is the unit that we use to measure kilowatt hour of energy, is lower than the 3,000 utilities that operate throughout the United States. My cost is now less than 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So the other utilities, they stagger, they make tiers, and some of them have a low tier 1. So I get arguments all the time, Nevada Energy has a lower cost than your 10 cents. Yeah, in tier 1 it does. But tier 1, they give you a capacity of kilowatt hours. Once you go over that in your month, it goes up to the next tier, and then you blend those rates, and yes, then my solar generated unit, kilowatt hour, is lower. So now that there is a financial argument, now in 2006 it wasn't that way. I was generating at 21 cents per kilowatt hour. But fast forward 15 years later, and we've gotten so efficient, and with economies of scale, our products, our technology has come down in cost. So as a replacement for centralized power plant electricity, meaning it's a hub and spoke. In your hub, it's a power plant run by a utility, and they've got you hooked up, and you are hooked up on a monthly cost, and you've got all these transmission lines, which, by the way, are also very ugly. So there is visual pollution we are fighting at the same time. But you have all these transmission lines that run out to city centers, and along the way, those transmission lines
losing energy.
Thank you. There's line loss right there, whereas we're dealing in something called distributed energy. So you're essentially popping a power plant at the site at which you need the electricity. There is little, if any, line loss on the way from your rooftop into your refrigerator. That's where we beat them on technological, social, logical, all those arguments, and financial arguments. So we beat any existing hub and spoke model or mechanism for delivering electricity to human beings. And we just keep getting better and better at it. Our costs keep going down, and shocking, their costs keep going up. They have to dig for coal in deeper mines. Delivery costs are more expensive. The unions involved in those deliveries, those costs are increasing all the time. We're not exposed to those, and we've been able to grow as an industry.
Mm-hmm. As we toured the facility, we got a glimpse of the different types of solar panels, solar lighting, and the technological advancements that make solar energy more efficient and more accessible than ever.
So that's how it collects in DC, and it needs to be inverted to AC, and this is the inverter. Back in the day, we used to use those big inverters over there. Those were centralized inverters. Everything was strung into it. Now we have what are called microinverters, and they turn every DC solar panel into an AC panel. It gives us much greater flexibility in where we can place the panel. Much less copper wire is needed to string everything together. So this is a wonderful thing, this AC. So this is SunPower, and this is a company called Enphase, and there's your Tesla. So again, combined, you have yourself a communicating microgrid. So that is where we're working towards. Before, when you and I first talked, this is all we were putting up because this tech was not around.
Right.
Nope. But now, this is exactly what we do. We couple these two together, and that's how we are getting closer to what we call cutting the cord. So that we are cutting the cord between these ratepayers and the utility. And that's why the utility is fighting bad, because the tech is just jumping leaps and bounds. So they're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? Everyone is putting a microgrid in. They don't need our macrogrid. And it's shutting their model down. We live in an app era, and the SCE and the rest of them, they're all what we call newspaper era. They're working off a model of centralized delivery of electricity from one coal burning or gas burning facility, and that is so 1800s. We're no longer there. Actually, it's so 2010. I mean, we have just gone far beyond that model that the utilities currently survive on, and that's why utility, they want to be involved so they can have their own solar.
Right.
So this is the microgrid.
Yes, that's a microgrid.
And this is the...
Well, that's what we call, when you combine the two, it's a microgrid. This is solar photovoltaic. This is battery storage.
Okay.
When you combine the two, you create a closed loop energy grid called a microgrid.
And then this
is your phone. Essentially, there's your app like that. If you were to have your phone out, that's what your app looks like. It'll tell you how much energy you're using and how much your battery has stored, how much is being provided in the daytime by your solar. And that's your look-see into your own grid, your own microgrid.
So the beauty of something like this for me, and arguably for other people, is when I'm driving, I can see real-time gas mileage, so I know what I'm doing, and so I modify my driving to increase my gas mileage. So if you've got something like this and you said, God, I'm using a lot of energy by having my window's open or closed or whatever this is. Right. And you change it and you go, there's an immediate feedback.
Do you see that? You're changing your behavior.
Yeah, and so we are increasingly living within our means.
Right.
In your system is our means, right. And it allows you to live within that.
That is not a philosophy, that is real. That is what is happening with energy in our world. And it has to start with America, because as America goes, the rest of the world follows. So that plugging in so human beings are more conscious of their behavior, especially their energy behavior.
What's the principle on this kind of lighting here?
In the desert here, when you put a skylight in because you want to capture that natural daylight that we get, because we have 350 days or plus of sunlight, the skylight doesn't have any protection from you losing your air conditioning and gaining heat. So you get all that AC loss, heat gain. The solar tube is really just a simple round tube that's got highly irradiant 3M film around it, like a mirror, and you just put that tube on the interior of the building, wherever you want it, and you get that natural bright light, and there's a UV protected dome on the top. So you're pulling all that light in, it's reflecting, refracting, and getting spread out all throughout the inside.
So what about heat gain or loss?
Without AC loss, without heat gain, and it keeps all, because of the UV protection, your carpets and things won't get stained, the colors won't come out, and there you go, you just get the natural light, all the element you're looking for.
Right here.
Yeah, we have 75 throughout this. Every building we go into, we add these, and it's a nice way. It keeps people happy. Moods are better. They put these in schools to see if there was a difference in some of the learning for students, and they found that students would get better grades as a result of having natural daylight. And so there's nothing negative about a solar tube. They've just been a great addition. And then, of course, for me as an energy guy, what I like about it is now you don't need to turn on that light switch, and as a result, you're saving from having to power something. So you get natural light in lieu of costly electric. Because that sun is always, it's always coming up on the east side and then dropping on the west. And so if you can catch that west sunlight, especially during the summer out here, because you know how the sun slowly sinks into that sky, man, you pick up so much additional solar when your panels are pointed in that direction. Yeah, so this is really a new way for us to get an east-west configuration, as well as it's much safer, less penetration on the rooftop. They're a self-ballasted way of mounting the solar panels. They click in. It's a much quicker way to put the modules on. And then, like I say, by self-ballasting, there are trays under here where concrete blocks go, and that will keep it down up to 130 miles, keep the whole system down up to 130 miles an hour.
That should do it.
Yeah, that should do it, right? I mean, sometimes we get some heavy speeds, and they're like a sail. I mean, they like to pick themselves up.
So what might happen, what I hope happens, is we have a culture that people put in really big lawns because it's a status symbol, and it's a waste of water, it's a waste of everything, but that's what people do. And as we convert our thinking, having solar panels on the roof might become a status symbol. And so the more you've got, the better you are as a person in your community.
Right on. And it certainly is, for those people who don't think like that, they think of the green, the savings.
Right.
So that's about 80% of our customers are more involved with the money it saves them. So our messaging in the beginning was, hey, this is a green status symbol. This shows that you care about your neighborhood, just like wearing a mask shows how much I love you and care about you, and I care about you and love you, but I can't hear you. You wouldn't be able to hear me, and I'd be like, okay, your editing would be horrible. But it's a very similar thing. It's to show that humans understand their impact by everything that they do, including generating their own electricity to live. So yes, it was a status thing, and I was hoping that would catch fire in 2006. Nope. People want to talk about how much money was it saving me. So we went from tie-dye shirts to a more regimented orange, and this is how much money. They want to see the finances before they...
Yeah, and I get that. It'd be interesting to just insert that periodically and see if it resonates as time goes on.
It will. I promise it will. I promise you, when we start to show cities that have adapted a greater percentage of photovoltaic versus those who haven't, all things considered equal, you'll see a greater environmental impact on those cities where people were more environmentally aware and had a real concern about the future. And when you see that and those studies come out, right now, it really takes a federal mandate to have those studies made. And we do not have anyone in the federal government at the moment who wants to, not yet. In short order, we will. And when we do, you will see those studies made. That is called science. We will use science again. And when we can use the statistics of science, you'll see people say, okay, this isn't elves and magic. It really does work, and it saves me money. I would rather hear the environmental purpose be addressed first and then the financial purpose.
We got a chance to meet some of the Renova staff and get a sense of the variety of green jobs created by the solar industry.
Because every home is different. These gentlemen are troubleshooters. They go out and they do the evaluations. They're our first line of defense. They go out, they measure everything. They talk to the customer. They calm the customer. They let them understand the process. We don't send the animal salespeople. You walk through, the ones who bite, you don't want them to go out and represent the company. It's these beautiful men who go out and go, okay, especially this one, I have to recognize. Their job is horrible. When it's 120 out, they're on the rooftop. They're measuring in 120. They don't know what the customers are going to be like or what they'll be afraid of when they first meet them. So they have some horror stories, but all of they have to take pictures of all of the condition of the home's electrical panel and do a diagnosis on that roofed surface area for us to mount the modules, and then they create the proposals that the animals in there will then present to the customers. So these are the real VIPs that we talk about, and this man trains them.
So yeah, so all these measurements were taken on the site survey, and a technician was able to take a measurement from the top of the roof and on the sides and make sure that he drew in on the obstructions. These obstructions are pretty much what keeps us from designing over them. So now that I finished the design here, this is a design that I created for a sales consultant earlier this morning. And we were able to fit 22 modules on this east roof. And now I took in consideration of these little obstructions here. So as you can see, that I didn't go over any of them. And the shade shots that we're taking.
So my question is that solar works best when it's full sun. Obvious, but
Without any shade.
No shade, no obstructions, you just want sun. However, the flip side of that, from a passive solar standpoint, you want shade on the sides of your house or on your roof. So how do you balance those things?
Interesting question. When you add a solar panel, we put a stanchion, a leg in, that'll lift about 4 to 6 inches so that the solar module, the array, will sit 4 to 6 inches above the roof. We've found that we can lower the temperature in rooms where the solar modules, where the arrays are located, by a good 10 degrees than any other part of the house, because that solar array will actually manage to draw the heating properties of the visible spectrum away from touching the roof surface and heating up that surface and ultimately heating the room down below. So there's a bit of a give and take there. I love trees, but what's interesting is when you look at, for example, a tree on a shade shot, sometimes those trees are like 50 feet tall. So humans don't really get the benefit of a trunk. So when we tell a customer, well, you can either have that trunk in your life and a bunch of palm fronds, which will reduce the efficiency and output of your solar system, or you might decide to take the tree down.
Right. So certainly a palm tree is not much value from a shade standpoint, but I'm thinking like if you had a mesquite or a Palo Verde that had a more complete shade profile, that could benefit the passive solar aspect of your house, but it has a negative impact on your solar day. So you have to balance those.
Then we would suggest if the cooling from the array isn't going to be enough of a how do you say an offset or an exchange, then you would do things like other efficiencies for glass, for glazing. Either you put up shading over the glass, meaning you put up an awning type, or tinting your windows so that you can repel that heat from there. But as far as the trees, and I struggle with only that I love to have trees there breathing, and that's where it's kind of one of those hard conversations that you have to have with people. But when you tell them that their solar system will be offsetting so much carbon, again, it's an exchange. It's the tree offsetting the carbon, or it's the solar array in their home offsetting the carbon. And so we haven't really had knockdown dragouts, or we just tell customers, let's not cut the whole tree down. Let's just keep it trimmed back. And folks are good with that too. They just have to do a little more maintenance in order to see that they're to make sure that their system gives it the output that they need. And if we see output come down, which you can see, your solar system's application will allow you to see if you're getting less energy generation, which would mean that, one, the system needs to be cleaned. Out here in the desert, we're looking at cleanings about every 5 to 6 months, just to take off the grime on the top, and that gives it its greatest amount of efficiency. And number two, it's any of the shading that comes about from trees, so they just have to get up and trim those trees.
Yeah.
This is Matthew. Do you know Matthew De La Torre and Jamie? Matthew is our VP of engineering, and we had him when he was 3 years old, and he's managed to grow. Now he's, what are you, 5, 6 now?
Yeah,
4.5.
In Renova.
Yeah, cut his teeth on solar. Yep. So all of those sprightly young men in there are under his leadership, and they bring him all of the problems and quirks, and because every home is different, so it's always a challenge. And so he's downsizing systems, upsizing, making all of the engineering decisions, because every system is custom.
Yeah, you'd think after 10 years of doing this that we'd seen every roof, but no, or seen every electrical panel, but no.
I'm still waiting for him to come in and go, I'm really bored, but it doesn't happen.
It's all cookie cutter, no?
Yeah, and Jamie is essentially our liaison. I don't know why we go, is it permit runner that we call you?
Permit coordinator.
No, that's ridiculous. She's really the liaison between Renova and all the cities and the county. And so everything that goes on, she goes in and, was that?
I like that better, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's much, the ambassador of permits, and every city is different.
Yes.
She could give you horror stories, but she goes in and she loves them and they love her, and so we're able to get things moved through. But they are every single city, and we just happen to be in 7 of them, right? And they're all different. Their processes, and under COVID, everybody had a different reaction. And this young lady had to discover doors locked, phone calls, like she shows, going up to her and goes, So, right? So everyone
else was locked in my face, just as soon as I'm like, here.
No. Yep.
Slip it under the door.
No, I was like, can I please hand it to somebody? They're like, no.
No, we can't take it.
And so one area that we're really working on is to electronically be able to file with cities, but they just don't seem to be adapting to the software. Who would you say would be the best local example in the Valley of being able to adapt to electronic filing?
Desert Hot Springs is definitely number one.
Right on.
Their turnarounds and systems, and they get it done quick.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's accurate, it's easy.
Must be all that funding they get up there.
Yeah, right. Sure. I don't think so.
Well, that goes.
In the last 5 years.
Yeah, no, it hasn't really. Yeah. So, how about can we Palm Springs? How are they?
Oh yeah, the worst.
Palm Springs is doing it by email. And with the volume that they process, I think they're having a difficult time managing that.
Okay. So it's tough.
Things have gotten lost and slipped through the cracks, and it's a lot to manage just things in an email, where it's not a software program set up to manage your entire process. Palm Desert developed a new portal. They're still working out a couple quirks, but it's working pretty well. they're getting our stuff back to us quickly.
Good.
La Quinta.
Well, since they're in the IID, so since they're in Imperial, and we can talk about that if you'd like on the way up, because I should be outside when I yell.
We finished our tour at the warehouse facility where solar panels are ready to be sent out and installed at homes and businesses.
So in the morning, all the crews trucks are out there. The crews show up here. We've got about 120 guys who are out in the field. They collect everything they need. They pick up their solar modules, and then they head out to their jobs. So they have their job jackets that show what job they're doing. It's already pre-engineered, and they start their work. It takes on average a day and a half for us to install systems that back in 2006 when I was installing, it would take us 2 weeks. And now it takes us less than 2 days for that same system.
You were an installer back then?
Oh yeah. Well, that's how we began it. I mean, it was all hands on deck. So I would go out and sell the system, make the coffee, order the materials, talk to the customer, do all the marketing, absolutely everything. And then after the first year, we started to grow. So now we're over 200 people now.
So 200 employees that are able to make a living. This is a living wage and all that?
We're part of an industry that we now call the Solar Plus industry because it's solar plus battery. And the Solar Plus industry now has over 250,000 gainfully employed full-time employees.
So from my perspective, rooftop solar makes all the sense in the world. And you've already talked about this in terms of the efficiency. You're putting the energy generator where you're going to use it. And so that's important. But the alternative for folks that either don't feel like they can invest in solar or don't like the look of solar is this, what I call industrial solar or landscape scale solar, where people are covering sometimes hundreds of acres, sometimes thousands of acres of our desert for the most part. So this is habitat for tortoises, habitat for all sorts of organisms, and putting solar on there. And so there's this balance that they're trying to equate in terms of, we're losing habitat, but on the flip side of that, we are solving our energy problem. But with rooftop solar, you're not making that trade-off. You're not damaging the environment. So what is your perspective on solar?
In 15 years, I have never become a fan of what they call large-scale or utility solar. The word utility is in it. The utilities are only in the solar business because they're being forced, kicking and screaming, to come into this industry. When they create a field of solar panels, which, by the way, this technology was literally created to go into small spaces. So they are pretty much bastardizing the technology to put into large fields. They're hurting the environment in those fields. They're carrying and transmitting that electricity with the same problems inherent in transmission, the line loss, etc. Well, when I say etc., there's the line loss, plus the fact that when a utility's substation gets shut down, like we had here in California, the solar gets shut down. So that energy cannot go from that field to the city center where it's needed. So that's an inherent problem when you build these large systems. But again, the utility is in the business of taking investors' money, pouring it into these large projects, and then operating those projects for a 20, 30, 40-year period of time. That's just anti-intuitive to what solar is all about. Solar is an individual choice to build on an individual's property to offset their individual load. And fine, if you say there are people who maybe don't have rooftop space for their own solar system, that's where community solar comes in. So you can find spaces around a community where solar can go in to the grid to offset apartment dwellers' loads, and they're greening their lives through those smaller community systems. Large scale utility solar is bad solar. There is good solar and bad solar. So when we had a local senator who's an incredibly brilliant person come out and say, solar is to blame for the brownouts and blackouts that we had. No, it had nothing to do with it. It was the centralized utility that shut down the transit system for that solar to reach the city center. So anything that's built way out there is going to have a problem with getting way in here when the transmission lines are shut down. So there is a difference in solar, and the solar that we do is for individuals. The microgrids that we create are for individuals. And having that energy independence is key to this replacement technology that we're installing every day.
The cost per watt you've described already as being equivalent or cheaper than you could get elsewhere, and that's great. But there still is this upfront cost of putting these things on, which somebody who is not terribly affluent, that might be a barrier to them.
Right.
Do you see, maybe that isn't something that you can deal with directly, but do you see a mechanism that will allow people like that to get into?
I can deal with it. What is happening is that is the propaganda that the utilities place on solar. The propaganda is that there are the haves and the have-nots, and only the wealthy can receive. That is purely coming from the model that we're replacing. And again, we are replacing utility-driven and delivered electricity. We have, through financing, Renova, for example, we lease 70% of the systems that we install. And when we lease, all you need in order to lease is to own the home. And so if you own the property, it makes sense for you to install the solar, and it makes even more sense not to put any money up front. And all you need is a 600 FICO score, and if you own the home, likely you have better than a 600 FICO score. So anyone who owns a home can put a solar system on at no cost. And what they're doing is they're paying a lease payment that, with Renova customers at least, you have an immediate return on your investment of 50%. So, in other words, if the utility is charging you $100 a month on average for the electricity to keep you and your family comfortable, I can give you a lease with solar to deliver the same amount of electricity at $50 per month. And that lease is fixed for 20 years, but that $100 that the utility is asking for on average, you're at 110, 120, 130 year over year. So getting in on solar, there is never an opportune time, more opportune than right now. So, and the lease takes care of any of the fallacy that the utilities try to create in order to stop people from adding a solar power plant to their lives.
So I have just one last question that was on my mind. And this is just really, since you have been a visionary for this industry, what do you see 10 or 15 years out? How do you think the industry is going to look then?
Sure. Yeah, by 2030, you will say Southern California Edison who? Because they are an investor-owned utility that are driven by all of the energy-generating projects that they create. And by 2027, 2028, more people will be going to solar when they buy a new home than will be calling Southern California Edison to get the meter hooked up in their name. Therefore, we are rendering the centralized generating utilities, we're rendering them back to the newspaper era age that they came from, and they will be there to power heavy loads, industrial loads, but that's only about 20% of their overall business. So they will be very hard pressed to remain in business operating the way they currently do by the year 2028 to 2030. So I say that within 10 years, this technology, coupled with batteries, creating microgrids, will entirely replace our number one competitor, which are the large-scale electric utilities. That's where we're going, giving people control over their power, electric vehicles coming home at night using their battery to subsidize the load in a home, plugging into the home, understanding their electric needs, we're smart. Humans are pretty smart, and we adapt very quickly when a good idea has come. And microgrids using solar and batteries has come. And that's why you see the electric utilities panicking and creating the propaganda on why you shouldn't get solar, why you can't. We have a perfect example because in our community we're bifurcated by an investor-owned utility in Southern California, Edison, and what I call a cartel utility, which is the Imperial Irrigation District, run by 5 members who have interests outside of giving the most efficient electricity to their ratepayers. And that IID is creating so much of a kerfluffle about how solar is bad, and they have prevented 380,000 ratepayers from going solar. That's what we're now currently, with a lot of community leaders, we're currently in the midst of helping the board of the IID recognize the error of their ways and allowing ratepayers in the Imperial Irrigation District to go solar again.
Well, when that happens, we'll be first in line.
Yes, you are. 100%.